Hi everybody, and welcome to Audubon at Home. My name is Sharon, and things are going to be a little different today. So today, we got a new animal ambassador here at the center. So come on in, let's go meet him. This diamond-backed terrapin came to us from the Wildlife Clinic of Rhode Island. He was surrendered by someone. Now, diamond-backed terrapins are a protected species in Rhode Island, and they cannot be pets. Diamond-backed terrapins require a lot of special care. They're found in brackish water. Now, brackish water is a mix of salt water and fresh water, so it's important for us to keep his tank at the proper salinity level. Darwin is the first diamond-backed terrapin that the Audubon Society has ever taken care of as an animal ambassador. We had a custom tank made for Darwin. It has an elevated area with some substrate for him to dig in and bask under his heat lamp. To access this, he can go up his ramp or down his ramp if he wants to go swimming, where he has plenty of space to swim around in that water. We are very excited to have Darwin as one of our animal ambassadors here at the Audubon Society of Rhode Island. Now I'm going to send it over to Lisa, who's going to teach you a little more about Darwin and diamond-backed terrapins.
Why, thank you, Sharon, for telling us how we got this wonderful new addition to our Audubon ambassadors. This, everybody, is Darwin. And Darwin has only been here for a little bit at the Audubon Society. And we're going to meet him today because we've been thinking a lot about water. And so when we think about all the different kinds of water we have in Rhode Island and how important water is to all the wild animals and plants here in Rhode Island, we can think about how animals that live in and around the water have things on their bodies that help them be able to live in that kind of environment. So let's take a good look at Darwin and try to figure out what he has to be able to live in a water environment. You probably notice his feet. He's sort of showing them there for you. He's putting them out. And if you notice on his feet, between his toes, he has webs like a duck has. So this turtle has this exact spot on its body to help it be able to swim in the water. So he was showing us his wonderful webbed feet, and you probably see he's got some claws on those webbed feet as well. So that's going to help. A lot of the water environments in Rhode Island are not just water. Sometimes there's rocks and there's sand and there's other things that they have to climb around too. So those webbed feet and those claws will help a lot. Let's also look at the shape of his body too. So when we look at Darwin, we notice that he's got this wonderful shell that's kind of flat on top. There's some bumps on it, like a lot of turtle shells, but he doesn't have a very tall shell. Some turtles have a very tall shell like a helmet, and his is not like that at all. He's got kind of a flat shell, and I'm gonna just show you his underneath for a sec, just so you can see the bottom of his shell as well, right? It's kind of flat under there as well, which means that when he's swimming through the water, he does not hit a lot of resistance when he's swimming. Like when we're swimming through the water, if we are wearing our big flippers and we've got our big water wings and things like that, sometimes it's harder for us to get through the water because there's a lot of us to get through the water. When you're kind of streamlined like this, it means it goes easier through the water. It's sort of water dynamic instead of aerodynamic, and it helps them go faster. So just the shape of his body means that he's very good for living in the water. Let's see what else we notice about him. He's stretching out his neck. He's a very curious turtle. And he can stretch his neck kind of far. Now, of course, all turtles have this wonderful, wonderful protection of their shell, but by having that neck that can stretch out kind of far, it means that they can stretch out to get their food, and they can stretch their head up to the top of the water without even having to get their whole body out of the water. That's really helpful because there might be things around, especially when the turtles are young, that might want to eat them. So let's look again at Darwin's body and think about the kind of things that he has to help him survive in those water environments, right? So we've talked about his webbed feet. We've talked about his color, or we haven't talked about his colors. Let's talk about his colors next, because we've talked about how his shell is shaped and how his nose and his eyes are at the end of his head there, so he can just poke those out of the water and look for danger. But let's really look at the colors that he has on his body. So you'll notice that on his shell, he doesn't have really a green color. Sometimes people think turtles have a lot of green. This turtle does not have a lot of green. This turtle has a lot of gray, and there's a lot of spots on his head. He almost looks like he's got some dark spots on a light colored head, so he's sort of white and gray on his head. And then even his shell, it almost looks like wood to me. It's like got the colors of what you might see in a twig, or if you are looking at a branch, he's got all those kind of colors. So all of those things that we're learning about Darwin by looking at this diamondback terrapin, it really helps us understand where he lives, the exact kind of water environment where he lives. So definitely water, but not just any old water. Diamondback terrapins live in brackish water. So brackish water is kind of a mix of salt water and fresh water. And that's a little unusual because here in Rhode Island, we've got freshwater turtles like painted turtles and snapping turtles. And we've got saltwater turtles that are off the coast that we sometimes get a chance to glimpse when you're on a boat, like a leatherback sea turtle. But we don't really have a lot of turtles that live in that in-between. And diamondback terrapins are one of those. And they're kind of a rare turtle. We don't see them very often. There's one place in Rhode Island where they nest, and that's in Barrington off the Barrington River. And what they're looking for is they're looking for kind of a salt marsh. So that's a place where there's kind of this salty or brackish water that is near where there's some grasses and reeds growing. And those grasses and reeds can grow in a place where they get flooded twice a day. So that's an interesting environment and kind of a hard environment for some animals to live in, but not for diamondback terrapins. That's a great place for them to live in. They like to crunch on salty snails and things that have shells, so they've got a beak just like other turtles do, and it's a strong beak like a snapping turtle so that they can crunch through those things. And they have to climb through all of those grasses and reeds and where the sand is, and they actually go up just above where the salt marsh is to lay their eggs. They don't want to lay their eggs where it's going to get soaked, where the water is going to come in and it's going to be flooded for half the time because the tides are coming in and going out. So they actually have to crawl up the hill from where the salt marsh is. And they like to nest in kind of a sandy plain area. It looks like a field and there's some trees along the edges. That's a perfect place for diamondback terrapins to nest, because they can dig a hole in that sand and it's nice and warm in the sun, and so that's what helps keep the eggs nice and warm so that they will actually incubate and they'll be able to hatch. Because a diamondback terrapin mom doesn't sit with her eggs like a bird does. They lay their eggs and then they go back to the water. And when those eggs hatch, so they're laying their eggs usually in June. Around here, it's June is really the main nesting season. There might be one or two in the beginning of July still, but by then they're mostly all laid. The moms go back to the salt water and they'll head out the brackish water and they'll head out towards the edge of the ocean there. And the babies will incubate. They'll probably start hatching out at the end of August, beginning of September. And those babies do something so interesting. They come out of their nest and they don't head to the water right away, like a sea turtle does. Instead, what they do is that first year, they try to find a good place in the woods that's right around where their eggs were laid, and they dig themselves into the sand and they hibernate for that first winter. So they don't usually get out to the water until their first spring after they've hatched. So that's another reason why these colors are so good for them, because they're hiding underneath the roots of the tree where they've dug a little hole so they could hibernate. So they want to be the same colors as the forest as well as of the salt marsh. They do have a lot of really interesting things about their body. I hope you enjoyed learning about Darwin with us, and I hope you continue to learn more about diamondback terrapins, one of our most unusual and rare turtles that we have in Rhode Island. Thank you for joining us for Audubon at Home.